We'll be talking a bit about the teachings on the characteristic of not self, anatta. And Ajahn Nyaniko and I have decided to split up the afternoon. I'll kind of open it up and make a few comments and go through one of the core teachings regarding this characteristic, and do some guided meditation and have an opportunity for some questions and answers, and then we'll take a brief break, and Ajahn Nyaniko will do the same, similar kind of thing. So just to put it in some context, the characteristic teaching on anatta, not self, it's part of the three characteristics of existence, the tilakkhana, the characteristics of anicca, dukkha, and anatta, impermanence, suffering or unsatisfactoriness, and not self. And these are the descriptions or three characteristics that are sort of just what they say they are, characteristics of all conditioned phenomena, and is used. The teachings on the three characteristics are used as a reflective tool. This is something I think to start right from the beginning of the discussion today, that particularly around anatta, oftentimes it's picked up and used as like a philosophical standpoint or a metaphysical teaching of like there is no self, or the debate around that. And just to put right out there right from the beginning that the Buddha really wasn't intent on establishing like a metaphysical position, a statement of self or not, or no self in regards to whether there is one. In fact, it was one of the questions when he was asked directly, is there a self or is there no self? He essentially would not answer the question, because it just usually leads to all sorts of debates and arguments that lead away from what it is that he's trying to really point out in all of the teachings, which is often, as he says, he teaches just two things, suffering and the end of suffering. And the philosophical debate about the actual existence of a true self or not is not pertinent to the discussion of the ending of suffering. So he tended to avoid these kind of philosophical debates and point back to using it as a contemplative strategy, which will hopefully you'll kind of get the idea of what we mean by that by the end of the day today. Trying to give some examples and some guided meditations using it as a contemplative strategy. But just to acknowledge that oftentimes that the idea of dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, is a starting point for most of us, because we know very potently the experience of unsatisfactoriness, of suffering, and that's usually an entry point for most of us into this whole set of teachings that the Buddha offers. And from that point on, it kind of moves into many, many different areas, the basis being the Four Noble Truths, the truth of dukkha, the fact that there's a cause, and that there is an ending to dukkha. There is a resolution if we so apply the path, which is the fourth noble truth, the path to the end of suffering, the Eightfold Path. So it's often an entry point, the characteristic of dukkha. And the more you examine the characteristics, the qualities of dukkha, and reflect on transience and impermanence from very basic, obvious levels to the more subtle levels, and then start to explore anatta, not self, the more you see that the three of them, those three characteristics, are all really merging together into one experience when you start to understand them deeply from the level of experience. The qualities of anicca, dukkha, and anatta start to merge together as characteristics of of experience in the moment. And it's a matter of just using one or more as entry points, places where you can see the process actually happen in one's own experience, rather than just conceptualizing them or thinking about them as a concept. But you have to start somewhere, and we have to define our terms, and you have to start with kind of a conceptual understanding of it, which is part of what will happen today. So this is just kind of a survey course today. It's not the deep investigation into one or all of these characteristics, because that is essentially a lifetime of practice. So this is just to give a bit of an idea, with a particular focus on the characteristic of anatta. And anybody who's somewhat familiar with the actual teachings, the suttas, and the way that the Buddha presents them, knows that these teachings run throughout the whole canon in different ways. They're just so important and intermeshed with all of the teachings. It's hard to not encounter them in many different ways throughout all of the teachings. So the purpose is actually of this investigation, of this of this teaching, is really to deeply understand the characteristics as we experience life, as we experience our body, as we experience our mind, the world around us, and see how we get caught in reactivity, in judgment about the world around us and our lives, and as we kind of seek some sort of sense of peace and happiness, eventually we come to realizing that we need to really understand deeply the Four Noble Truths, particularly the truth, deeply understanding the truth of dukkha, the truth of unsatisfactoriness. And as we do that and reflect on that and the qualities of transience and not self, then the more deeply we see that, the more we become really clear that that the world of conditions, the world that we know and live in from a general day-to-day existence, is not where we can find ultimate peace, where we can find an end of suffering. And as we see these three characteristics playing out in our day-to-day experience, as well as within our meditation, then it gives rise to a sense of, the Buddha calls it disenchantment, but it's not a negative kind of a disenchantment. It's a very wise realization that where we've put our claim to happiness is only going to give us temporary bits of it. That there's not a sustaining, permanent kind of happiness that we can find in the realm of conditions because of their nature to constantly change, and the fact that we don't have an ultimate control over that, and that there's always going to be this combination of pleasant and unpleasant circumstances in our lives, so that trying to find refuge there isn't going to give us ultimate happiness. So that provides the launching point for being able, this kind of healthy, clear, wise disenchantment with finding permanent happiness in the world around us gives us the impetus to be able to look in a different direction and to look more towards what is not part of this realm of samsara, this realm of conditions, this realm of constant arising and ceasing, birth, death, and to be able to turn towards something that is much more stable and peaceful for the long term and can lead to complete liberation. So the contemplation of these three characteristics is core to reaching that kind of emotional or affective impetus to look deeper for something that's beyond what we normally take refuge in. So with that kind of goal in mind, we can kind of take a look particularly at the teaching around anatta today, but necessarily it weaves in and out with the reflections on anicca and dukkha. And I thought I'd just start out with just going over in English and kind of commenting a little bit on the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, which most of you are familiar with. We chant it quite frequently here in Pali and occasionally recite it in English as well. And just to go through section by section, just offer a few reflections, and then maybe have a period where we can do a brief guided meditation around the not-self aspect of our body, and then go from there. So the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, if you want to follow along, is in the second volume of the chanting book. And we'll go over it, of course, in English. It starts on page 14. And it's kind of divided into a couple of different sections. The first section addresses what we would call the uncontrollability of the five khandhas. And then the second section, and then the conceptual conclusion that anywhere we can't find a permanent self in any of the five khandhas. Second section talks about it from the more from the aspect of not self, from the aspect of impermanence, starting from contemplation of impermanence. And then the third section is just kind of a summary section. So I'll just start with the very first section. Thus have I heard. At one time, the Blessed One was dwelling at Benares in the Deer Park. There he addressed the group of 5 bhikkhus. Form, bhikkhus, is not self. If, bhikkhus, form were self, then form would not lead to affliction, and one might be able to say in regard to form, let my form be thus, let my form not be thus. But since, bhikkhus, form is not self, form therefore leads to affliction, and one is not able to say in regard to form, let my form be thus, let my form not be thus. So you can see the Buddha is starting with form, rupa. The body is another way we can think of it, just referring in our own experience to this particular flesh and blood body. The first of the 5 khandhas, the people probably are familiar with the 5 khandhas, form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness being a descriptor, essentially, of what we normally think of as our human experience. Sort of a grouping of body and mind is another way of looking at it. Form, the body, the first one being body, and then the second grouping of the 4 factors, the 4 khandhas of feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness being mind, roughly. But starts out with the body. And you notice, I just interject here, the choice of translation of anatta as not self. And you see it translated in different ways through different users. Sometimes you see it as no self or non-self. But as in a way to avoid the doctrinal metaphysical declarations, no self is not such a great translation in my mind, because it leads one to think of a statement of existence or non-existence of self. And this is contrary to, I'm sure everybody has probably noticed in one of our morning reflections, we have what, to me, is not a great translation of a phrase. Sabbe Dhamma Anatta is one of the chants that we do. It's in the salutation to the Triple Gem. And the way that it's translated for the chanting is, there is no self in the created or the uncreated. And to me, that just comes out with kind of a flavor of a statement. There is no self, which is exactly what the Buddha refused to do. He would not make that kind of statement. So I have to say that I'm not all that excited about that particular translation, but it seems to be the one that has taken. It chants well, I guess, is one thing. There is no self in the created or the uncreated. But Sabbe Dhamma Anatta, I think could be better translated, even though it doesn't chant so well, as all dhammas are not self. Sabbe Dhamma Anatta, all dhammas, all phenomena, in that sense of the word dhammas, all phenomena are not self. And that puts it back more into a contemplative, okay, I can look at all the phenomena around me and understand and realize that that's not self, that's not self, that's not self, rather than saying there is no self, which moves into that kind of solidification of an idea. So just a commentary of my own there. And that in this translation is great, as far as I'm concerned. Form, bhikkhus, is not self. Because then it turns it into, well, let's look at that. Let's see how that we experience that. And then to tease that out, basically he's saying, if this body were self, then we would be able to have some control, some influence over it, regarding self as some sort of either self can appear in many different forms. It can appear in the form of actually having an identification with this body as me or who I am. This body is me. Of course it's me. It's always been me and it'll always be me until it dies. And so that's one way that the self-view can come up in relation to the body. It also can come up in a more subtle form, which I think is probably where more of us get caught in it on a regular basis. I think most of us with some reflection can see, to some extent anyway, conceptually that, okay, well, this isn't who I am. I mean, if this were who I am, then when it dies, I'm gone. And I don't think, some people may have an annihilationist viewpoint that it's all over when the body goes, and that's one viewpoint, but it's not one of the Buddha's teachings. So we can have this kind of, reflective acceptance that, okay, I am not this body, and kind of feel comfortable with that. But more often, I think we tend to experience it and view it as mine, meaning that there is some vague owner of this body, and we don't really think about who is that owner too much, but that's the sense, that's the experience that comes up, is that there is an owner to this body, and that, I'm not this body, but I have some control over it, I can tell it what to do, or we operate in that way, even if we don't consciously think that. We operate from that viewpoint of control and ownership. And that if we do certain things, then we'll take care of it, and we kind of operate under the idea, if we don't think about it too much, of that there is some sort of ultimate control. What the Buddha is saying is that if that were true, that there was some sort of ownership or ability to call it who we are or to own it, then we should be able to control it to the point where we would say, let it be like this, or let it not be like this. Don't get sick, don't get painful, don't get old. And then he says, but since bhikkhu's form is not self, form therefore leads to affliction. It has its own way, the way of nature, that the body that we experience and that we live with has a nature to change. It has a nature to get sick, and it has nature to essentially do what we'd rather it not do. And again, it's the way we operate, even if we don't believe that as a concept or as a belief. We operate that way because when we get sick or when we experience pain or when we start to realize, the change in energies of old age or any of these kinds of things, we get resistant to it, And if we really accepted that, if we really saw that, then we wouldn't have that kind of protest or that shock or that resistance or that objection, oh, it shouldn't be this way, and kind of get into our anxieties or our, kind of panics about what we need to do to take care of ourselves. And, we go to a huge extent of effort with our diets and with our medications and with our remedies and with our lifestyles and our ideas of how much rest I need and how much, what I need to do to take care of it, and all the opinions about, caring for the body and the ways that we try and control its destination, and our opinions about other people and what they should do with theirs, and and all of that too. So even though we can conceptually say, okay, well, I can understand that, the way we generally operate is through that sense of, well, when something kind of goes wrong, all bets are off, and we try and do everything we possibly can in response to minimize or maximize control. So just looking at how we respond in relation to this body with this sense of attachment, or this sense of self that congeals around it when something starts to go a bit wonky. And it's, the rare person who is able to pull it together in intense moments like that and say, this is the nature of the body. Bodies do this. This is the way it works in the realm of conditions. Ajahn Liam, just what came to mind right now is just the story of when Ajahn Liam, the senior monk at Wat Pah Pong in Thailand, some years ago started to have some heart failure. It started slowly diminishing. His ability, his heart started to get weaker, and he would be getting more tired and more short of breath, and it got actually quite to a severe point, much more severe than most people would allow it to get to, because obviously he noticed what was going on, but just was regarding, when somebody asked him, well, why didn't you seek some help sooner when you started to recognize it? And his comment was, well, this is just what bodies do. So the way he was able to hold that and reflect on that, there are many of us who might have said, well, you still should have sought help sooner for our sake. But he was perfectly okay with it because of his long time reflection on and experience and penetration of the truth that the body is not self. It wasn't, all that big a deal to him because this is just what bodies do. So that's the kind of reflection that we're trying to understand that, trying to start to really not only understand it intellectually, but to really embody that experience, so that when we're confronted with the inevitable aging and sickness, that we can hold it in that same kind of way, with the concern that we need to take care of it, but not feeling like this is who I am. Then the Buddha goes on through the rest of this reflection. Feeling is not self. If bhikkhus' feeling were self, feeling would not lead to affliction, and one might be able to say in regard to feeling, let my feeling be thus, let my feeling not be thus. But since bhikkhus' feeling is not self, feeling therefore leads to affliction, and one is not able to say in regard to feeling, let my feeling be thus, let my feeling not be thus. So this is just starting to take it into the mental realm, which is trickier. The body is something that most of us can see more clearly. It's pretty tangible. We've all had our aches and pains, if not something more serious. But when it starts to get into the realm of the mind, things get a little bit trickier. It's not quite so solid and intangible. Feeling referring to that general overall feeling tone, whether it's a bodily experience or a mental experience, but the feeling tone of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And that, this is an important contemplation because it's where we start to develop the craving mind for pleasant feeling and the aversive mind towards unpleasant feeling. And so much of our suffering comes from ricocheting between those two extremes of wanting to find the pleasant, wanting to get rid of the unpleasant, and then all the neutral stuff in between, just not even being aware of. So that realizing that that unpleasantness or that pleasantness or that neutrality in relation to all experience isn't something that we have a lot of, control over. And when I say that, it's, both with the body and the mind, it's not that we don't have some sort of influence. There's a modicum of some sort of control, particularly about how we respond to a situation. We do have that power to generate an intention and move with that and create an action from intention. But ultimately, on a full-on basis, we don't have that kind of ultimate control. There are going to be unpleasant circumstances, unpleasant feelings. There are going to be pleasant feelings. And that's also part of nature. It's just built into the system. Perceptions, mental formations, perceptions being how we understand and kind of perceive the world around us, trying to bring sense into the world through categories, memories, identifying objects of our sense field. Those and mental formations, the more active productions of mind, intentions, thoughts, how the mind moves out in the world. Those are also not self. And this is where the contemplation can start to get interesting if you are in a quiet state of meditation and starting to watch some of the mind factors and even things like the thoughts. So much of the time we identify with those. That's who we are. We believe in the thoughts that come up into our mind. They represent something that we think is absolute, truthful, real. And we form a lot of sense of identity around our views, our opinions, all of those factors of thinking and thought that come up in mind. Views and opinions are a really strong place for the sense of self to grab hold. That sense of, I am right, you are wrong. And we establish standpoints and viewpoints, and it's the basis for a lot of the discontent in the world. But to see that that's all part of the realm of conditions, the conditioning that we have, the perception, how we perceive the world, how we view somebody, how we experience certain events, it's all how we've conditioned our mind through what we pay attention to and how we pay attention to it. And that essentially there is no agent or no entity that we could call a self who is managing all of this, who is like the director overriding all of our perceptions and our thoughts and our feelings. That it's this very rapidly occurring set of memories, habits of wanting or not wanting, how we would like to see the world, our ideals, all being pasted on the experiences as they come into awareness from the outside, from the sense realm, or the internal sense base of thinking, memories. What we impute onto that, our whole way of looking at the world, and then the way we react to it and put stuff back out into the world. It's all pretty much of a conditioned response that happens because of all of the causes and conditions that go into it. But we don't have to impute yet another layer of self on top of that whole process. That's an additional thing that we do. It's yet another way of perceiving things, sort of the overall program that we put into our experience, that there is someone who is experiencing all of these feelings, all of these perceptions, and managing all of these thoughts. We operate from that base of a sense of we're a personal manager. There is a personal manager of this whole experience. And the Buddha says, well, we don't have to do that. We can drop back from that and see this from a more experiential viewpoint. I think that realm, the mental realm, is embodied in the title of that one book, which I haven't read very much of, but I like the title of Thoughts Without a Thinker. There are thoughts, but there is no thinker. And the same with consciousness. Consciousness is not self. If it were, then we would have some control over it. We would be able to control it so that our awareness, our consciousness, vijnana, wouldn't lead to affliction, and that we would be able to say, let it be like this, let it not be like this. But we have very little control, for the most part, of where our consciousness lands, whether it's on sights or sounds or tastes, tactile sensations, smells, thoughts, ideas. And the consciousness, this basic level of awareness, is constantly dodging and moving between all of these sense bases, one after another, in rapid succession, to create this weave together this sense of continuity of experience. And what's driving it is basically greed, hatred, and delusion. Interest, disinterest, wanting, not wanting, confusion, not being able, it happening so fast that we can't really see it happening. So all of these underlying tendencies of mind are driving what it is that we're conscious of. We see something pleasant, or a pleasant image comes into our basic fundamental awareness, and our attention moves to the realm of sights. That interest fades away, and all of a sudden something that we hear is more interesting or more captivating, for better or for worse. That's where our attention goes. Or a bodily sensation arises that's pleasant or unpleasant, and all of a sudden our consciousness is oriented in the realm of tactile sensation. And this just keeps happening over and over again, all the time, and weaves together this sense of me experiencing the world around me. So, but you can't say that there is anybody in control of that. There's not a single personal entity. It's based on causes and conditions. So that first section is the Buddha's instruction on how to reflect on the five khandhas in regard to not self, the general uncontrollability, and the point that if we could absolutely control it 100%, then we could make it such that it would be great, perfect, and we would have no worries forever. But that's not the case. Then the second section here is the reflection on impermanence, starting with, what do you think about this, bhikkhus? Is form permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Venerable Sir. But is that which is impermanent painful or pleasurable? And, that's a reasonable enough interpretation of that, but painful, pleasurable, it might be a bit strong or suggestive in some way that isn't quite as useful to me as maybe like is what is impermanent satisfactory or unsatisfactory or satisfactory might be a better way for me to reflect on it anyway. So so is the fact that form is impermanent and always changing, is that satisfying or unsatisfying, satisfactory or unsatisfactory? Unsatisfactory, Venerable Sir. But is it fit to consider that which is impermanent, unsatisfactory, of a nature to change, as this is mine, I am this is myself? Well, the conclusion is no, it is not. Things are always changing. If they're basically not going to satisfy us in the long run, is it useful? Is it a good strategy to say, oh, this is who I am, or this is myself? No, that's not a good strategy. And then the same through with, is feeling permanent or impermanent? Is perception permanent or impermanent? Are mental formations, thoughts, ideas, permanent or impermanent? All of these parts of the mental world, you can really see in every moment how they're constantly changing. Just sometimes watch your thoughts without getting involved with them. Step back from them and just see how crazy and chaotic they can get to be sometimes if you just kind of let them flow without moving into the content. Just sit sometime and determine to just watch the words as they come up and watch the ideas as they come up and they change and they pass away and they go on. All of a sudden something else comes up and another memory comes in, and it's just this constant flow of, when you're looking at it from stepping back from an objective viewpoint, it can almost seem kind of nonsensical. It's like, well, where did that come from? And if you view it in that way, you can really start to get a sense of, well, I didn't have any control over that. I have no idea where that just came from, some past conditioning. I don't have to own that one. Just because I think it, I don't have to believe it. It's a common reflection from our teachers. So watching those things arise and pass away, and watching the fluid nature and the changeability and the transience of all of these mental factors, these views, these opinions, who are perceptions of people. One day somebody's a great friend, the next day they do something that irritates us, and they're, the worst person in the world. And then we resolve it, and all of a sudden they're our best friend again. Just these constant change of mental experiences based on our own conditioning. So to watch that change, and to recognize the truth of impermanence on both a very obvious level, the body's changing, we're going to die, to the very momentary level of all experience just as part of this same arising and passing in this very moment. It's constantly changing right here and right now. It's just of the nature to arise, pass away over and over again, right here in this moment. So that being the case, and we can't really take claim to find happiness there, can we really regard that as who we are, as some sort of part of a solid, unchanging entity when it's all changing? So the last section in the Anatta Sutta, I won't go over too much, but it's more of just the declaration of what the conclusions that we should have come to as he's going through this teaching. Wherefore, bhikkhus, whatever form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness there is, past, future, present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, whether it is far or near, just about any combination you can think of for any of these khandhas, all of this, by means of right wisdom, should be seen as it really is. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. And that was the essential teaching. This is the Buddha's second discourse. He gave the discourse, the Dhammacakka Sutta, initially, and then not too long after that, he gave this discourse to the 5 bhikkhus who were with him. And then, as in the last last couple of paragraphs on page 22, seeing in this way, bhikkhus, the wise noble disciple becomes disenchanted. And that's where the affective response to this understanding starts to happen. You've seen through the illusion of permanence, you've seen through the illusion of ultimate satisfaction, you've seen through the illusion of all the ways that self can manifest in regard to the 5 khandhas. And the emotional response is to become disenchanted with form, disenchanted with feeling, disenchanted with perception, disenchanted with mental formations, disenchanted with consciousness. Again, not in a negative way, but disenchanted in terms of like the enchantment is gone. That, enchantment being that kind of being fooled by, being absorbed in, buying into the magician's illusion. One loses that enchantment, becomes disenchanted. Becoming disenchanted, the passions fade away. With the fading of passion, the heart is liberated. And there comes the knowledge, it is liberated. And they know, destroyed is birth. The holy life has been lived out. Done is what had to be done. There is no more coming into any state of being. And that discourse was where these 5 bhikkhus all realized complete arahantship. after receiving this and contemplating it. So, very important sutta, and it's one that I memorized in English just to use as a contemplative tool when I'm doing meditation. Sometimes I'll go through and recite this just to bring up this as a contemplation, as a way of seeing deeply into the three characteristics, and particularly the experience of not self in relation to the body, feelings, perceptions, etc. So maybe just, is there any quick questions just regarding this particular sutta before we go into a guided meditation? Yeah.
How do you work with the issue of volition as not self?
It's a good one to ask. It's a good question because when I look at all the various mental factors that I experience, that particular one, intention, has a particular grab to it because you think, okay, I have the ability, to the intention has this real grab to it as control. Conform an intention not to do something, or conform an intention to act in a certain way, or to say something in a certain way, and it feels like me coming up and saying, directing the show. Like, okay, well, like I'm going to move my hand up. So I had an intention. That was me. It has that real strong sense, and I think that's where as we start to explore all of our experience, that's a very common stumbling point that I keep getting into all the time, of course, is subtly identifying with intention as self, because there does have this real sense of control over it. But just to realize that intention as a factor, as a mental factor, also arises out of causes and conditions. It's not an independently occurring movement of mind. That there has to be some sort of perceptual process that arises that then is recognized and felt as something either satisfying or something as painful or pleasurable, or that there's some desire that arises in relation to contact, an experience from the outside or the inside. That there's a perception that arises, and there is this, based on greed, hatred, or delusion, usually based on wanting or not wanting, something that's pleasant or unpleasant, and sometimes very subtly, that there arises this impulse to act in some way, to respond, even if it's just a thought. And that it is that impulse that is intention, essentially. It's the movement of mind that greed, hatred, or delusion is controlling. And that if we free ourselves from that, then that intention to respond, to get away from, or to get, doesn't arise.
So would you use the same explanation when you have intention and then you get to the action of choosing, making a choice? You would use the exact same explanation you just gave?
Well, yeah, making a choice is part of the intention. It's using the wanting or not wanting to move the mind towards some sort of action. Yeah. But it's all dependent on something arising that triggers it. Intention is dependent on a trigger of some sort arising, usually like a vipaka, as a resultant karma from somewhere coming in. Yeah. So it's not an independent agent. It's just as dependent as anything else is. Yeah. Neil.
It might not be a quick question.
Okay, well, if it's a real long one, answered one, I might save it till the end of this section, but go ahead. We'll put it on the table.
So sometimes in this sutta, the logic breaks down for me a little bit, and it might have to do with the meaning of particular words.
Mm-hmm.
Is that which is impermanent painful sure I understand why there's an automatic assumption that they all answer, because certain things being impermanent are good. Like I develop a rash and it goes away. That's a pleasurable thing. So I'm sort of think I'm missing something there.
Yeah, I think let's hold off on that. I think there is kind of you're maybe moving into it with too much of trying to divide it up into all sorts of things. And the Buddha's talking more about global experiences, I think, of transience and change in regard to permanence and impermanence. He's probably not trying to, state that every single thing is, going to be pleasurable or unpleasurable in that line.
Can you say just a little more about what you mean by global experiences?
Let's hold off on this and bring this up later, because we're getting close to 2:00, and I really don't have much time left and want to really go into this guided meditation on the body, because I think rather than debating definitions at this point, it might be more useful for everybody to just kind of sit down with a meditation, and then we'll go to that afterwards. Okay. So let's do a few minutes of a guided meditation. Find a comfortable position to be in. I'd just like to do a, hopefully not too long, meditation regarding the body, and one that I periodically pick up for myself as a self-guided meditation, just reflecting on the uncontrollability or the automatic nature of many of the bodily processes as a way of actually experiencing, not just thinking about or talking about, but actually experiencing the body just in terms of experience, and see where that goes. So just sit quietly for a minute or two to collect oneself and settle oneself. Come out of the realm of concepts and into the realm of tactile experience of this solid body. Get a sense of contact of body with surface, floor, bench, chair. Feel the sensation. Feel the pressure, the contact, pleasant, unpleasant. And move your attention up the body into the abdomen. If there's any holding there, let that open up, let the belly soften. Let the chest open up and the back and neck muscles relax. Let the shoulders drop. Feel the arms and the hands as they rest on the lap or the legs. The head, the neck on top of the shoulders. Notice the sensations in the face, the jaw, around the eyes. Yeah, and drop out of the realm of thinking and ideas into the realm of sensation, bodily sensation. And let your attention widen to include the whole body. Sometimes a subtle visual image can appear of the position that your body is in, sitting on the floor, sitting on the chair. Doesn't have to be a very detailed one, just mostly in conjunction with that tactile sensation of the whole body. Takes a bit of relaxing of the mental awareness to experience the whole body. And gently notice the in and out breathing. Full range of inhalation and exhalation. As broad as you can feel it through the whole body. And allow that to settle, calm the body and mind. So there's a couple of different contemplations that one can introduce into your meditation. Kind of points towards the not self perception in different ways. One kind of on a more global level or a more broad level of how we identify with this body as who we are. and just be aware of what it is that forms this body. We have arms and legs and torso and a head, and all of the internal structures, all the organs that comprise the bodily experience, all the fluids that comprise the bodily experience. And so we say, I am this body. This is who I am. Or we at least act in that way. We have a body image and form a sense of self around that. So, if we identify in that way, though, we can ask ourselves some kind of fun questions. You have to take this lightly and not in a kind of a moribund kind of a way, but just sort of as an exercise in imagination. That let's say that I had a disease in my right arm, or some sort of condition that, like gangrene or something like that, and the arm had to be taken off by surgery, and it was done. And now there is this body absent a right arm. So does that mean that I'm any less of myself than I was before? If my body was these arms and these legs, and this is who I am, now that I've lost that one part, does that make this body any less me? Or is there still me there? What if the same thing happened to the left arm? All of a sudden, I don't have any arms. Body can function without arms. Or my legs, one at a time, can exist without those too, and all that's left is a torso and a head. Still breathing, living, aware. Does that alter who I think I am? My conception of myself. Or, we can live without a kidney. We can even live without two kidneys. All of a sudden the kidneys are gone through disease, had to be removed. We're on dialysis. Gone. Those two internal organs are gone. Taking this to kind of maybe would be an absurd extreme, but the possibilities are still there of, say, losing all of one's digestive organs and going on something like IV nutrition. The body can still survive without food coming into the stomach and being digested. So those are gone. Can live with only one lung. So imagine just one lung being in there, one gone. We might lose our vision, lose our hearing. The body still can be functioning. Does that change our fundamental sense of how we view this body as who we are? And the Ajahn Chah used to take his body apart in his meditations, piece by piece, part by part, kind of visually lay them out in front of him, disassemble it all, to help deconstruct that sense of identity with this body. So yeah, where does the body stop being the body? When parts of it are removed, parts of it are changed? When does it stop being me? Does it make sense to identify with this form as we now experience it, putting it all back together again? We're back here with our arms and legs, etc. Does it make sense to really regard this as who I am? Now, in terms of the sense of controllability, let's look at some of the movements and manifestations of this body and ask ourselves questions around that. So go back to the face and the feeling of the muscles in the face. See, sense the different small movements around the eyes, around the cheeks, the jaw, the presence of saliva as it comes into the mouth and needs to be swallowed. Notice the little twitches, say, around the eyelids. Every now and then the tongue or the mouth moves in a certain way. And the cheeks or around the mouth, little twitches and movements that you're not consciously controlling. You're not saying, okay, I twitch. Step back and just watch that subtle movement. Same applies for the arms and the legs and the rest of the body. It's always kind of this little slight shifting movement, motion. Body's always tweaking itself to get just a little bit more comfortable. And that's not something that we are consciously doing. Watch that process for a minute. Is that jittering of the leg or that movement of the hand? You have absolute control over that. Command yourself right now to sit absolutely perfectly still and do not move. See if you can do that. Can you will your body to be absolutely perfectly still? Maybe for a few seconds. Notice the breathing. Go to that point in the chest or abdomen where you can really strongly sense the inhalation and the exhalation, particularly at the point where one turns into the other. And then for just a minute or two, try and consciously stop the exhalation from beginning or the inhalation from beginning. How much control is there with that? And then just relax that intention and watch that pivot point between inhalation and exhalation. Are you in charge of that? So now notice the body breathing, the subtle movements. And if the mind is quiet enough, you can quite likely feel the heart beating in the center of the chest. Quietly tune into that. See if you can feel that. Can you tell that heart to stop beating? Try it. Did it obey you? So feel all of these things together. Heart beating, lungs breathing, chest, abdomen rising and falling, subtle movements, the face, the arms. And reflect, this is just nature doing what nature does. This is a body that's living according to certain physical properties, nourishment, and then it follows the way of nature. And that we have a little, through our intentions, can tweak it a bit here and there, but really no ultimate control. The body will go the way it goes. You can just reflect on that and reflect that if you really can see that and experience that deeply, then when things come along to challenge its integrity, you can respond, with wisdom, but not with panic or anxiety. Because you realize, really in the long run, There's no one here who can control this. It's all out of control, and that's great. Before we move into opportunity for a few reflections or comments, I just want to read this one short teaching. I've often thought that it's one of the most important suttas in some ways, because it addresses a number of different things, but in some ways for me, as I contemplated it, kind of really brings together these three characteristics of anicca, dukkha, anatta into kind of a whole statement of some sort, how they interrelate and tie to each other, starting with, kind of this notion that we really are looking to see things, to see our experience through the lens of Dhamma. The lens of Dhamma being these three characteristics, so that we acknowledge the kind of objective reality, in a sense, of this body and all of its constituents, and the mind and all of its constituents. But we're looking at all of this experience just from the viewpoint of anicca, dukkha, anatta. So we really want to see all of this, letting go of our perceptions and conceptions, just in the realm of our experience of the world, arising, passing, and ultimately unsatisfactory, and not who we really are. Not trying to posit who, if there is a real who we are, but just saying what I can experience is not who I am. So at Sawati, then the Venerable Kachanagota approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side, and said to him, "Venerable Sir, it is said, right view, right view. In what way, Venerable Sir, is there right view? This world, Kachana, for the most part, depends upon a duality, upon the notion of existence and the notion of non-existence." When he says this world, he's referring to the world of experience, our world as we experience it. And how we experience it, that most of us will take upon this viewpoint of either existence or non-existence, meaning that generally the two attitudes of eternalism, like it's all going to happen and last forever, then it doesn't pass away, or annihilationism, like at the end of this bodily experience, it's all gone, there is nothing more. So this notion of eternalism or annihilationism. But for one who sees the origin of the world, the arising of experience, for one who sees this origin of the world as it really is, with correct wisdom, then there is no notion of non-existence or annihilation in regard to the world. If we can clearly see phenomena as it arises, then we won't adopt a standpoint. If we can really clearly see it all the time as it arises, then we don't adopt a viewpoint that it all ceases at some point, because we know for ourselves that it's just constantly arising. And for one who sees the cessation of the world of experience as it really is with correct wisdom, then there is no notion of eternalism or existence in regard to the world. We can see things constantly fading away, constantly changing. And when we see that, we won't hold on to this view that it will all last forever. This world, Kachana, this world of experience, is for the most part shackled by engagement, clinging, and adherence. But this one with right view does not become engaged and cling through that engagement and clinging. Mental standpoint, adherence underlying tendency. He does not take a stand about myself. He has no perplexity or doubt that what arises is only suffering arising. What ceases is only suffering ceasing. His knowledge about this is independent of others. In this way, there is right view. That to me is the crux of the teaching, at least in regard to the three characteristics. He has no doubt that what arises is only suffering arising. This is seeing our experience through the lens of Dhamma, just looking at experience as it arises, as the unsatisfactoriness of whatever it is. The truth of that dukkha arises, and that experience of dukkha, that experience of suffering, passes away, constantly arising and passing away. And that's all it is. That to me marries those three characteristics. It's dukkha, it's arising, it's impermanent, and it's just that. It's not who we are. So this experience of dukkha arising, ceasing, is just a part of nature in a way, and we don't have to adhere to it, cling to it, create a sense of self around it. We just see that it's happening. And then he just finishes, all exists, Kachana, this is one extreme. All does not exist. This is the second extreme. Without veering towards either of these extremes, the Tathagata teaches the Dhamma by the middle. With ignorance as condition, volitional formations come to be. With volitional formations as condition, consciousness comes to be. Then it goes through the whole cycle of dependent origination, which I won't go into now. That's a whole different thing. But basically pointing out that, again, this whole cycle of arising and cessation, as talked about in dependent origination, is also a impersonal sequence of experiences, pointing to the conditionality of all phenomena, the conditionality, everything depends on one another, and there's no overriding, controlling self or entity that's involved with all of our experience. And that's the sutta, that's the whole thing. It's a very short one. But I just think it's a beautiful one and really marries these three ideas of anicca, dukkha, and anatta all in kind of one statement. He has no doubt or perplexity that what arises is only suffering arising. What ceases is only suffering ceasing. So, time for a few comments or questions before we take a break. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can explain a little bit more about the khandha of consciousness. The of consciousness. What it actually is.
Yeah.
Khandha of consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard. Yeah. What is the khandha of consciousness? Yeah, it's kind of the most basic level of mental activity that the Buddha describes. All of these khandhas, by the way, they're not meant to be like really firm, fixed definitions of certain things that are set in stone. They're sort of descriptors of different kinds of mental experience or physical experience. But consciousness is one of the mental experiences, and it's sort of the most fundamental sphere of mental factors, so that it's always described in relation to one of the 6 sense bases. So there's eye consciousness, ear consciousness, tongue consciousness, nose consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness too. So it's this basic fundamental level of attention and awareness in relation to one of these 6 sense bases. So, your attention essentially right now, you might notice it in the visual field. There's a moment of visual consciousness happening. At that moment, in that moment, you're not really probably very aware of the sense of pressure on your rear end on the cushion in tactile consciousness, when your mind is totally with visual consciousness. All of a sudden, because I said it, you might feel the sensation in there, but you may not be aware of, say, a smell in the room. So you can play with that and try and get a sense of what consciousness really is, just by noticing how when you're really attuned consciously to one sense base, all of a sudden you weren't attuned to another sense-based consciousness. And so it's this constant play back and forth of where the attention gets directed as to where consciousness lands, that awareness lands in one particular 6 sense space. So rather than try to give you a hard and fast definition, look at it from the level of experience. Watch and see how that awareness of sights or sounds or tactile sensations or thoughts, when you're totally absorbed in a book or an idea or thinking about something, you may not even be aware of visual forms, people coming into the room or the sound of the door closing, if your mind is that honed in on one sense base. So just to have fun with that and experiment with that. It can be a fun thing to do. Neil, I don't want to dismiss your question, and just to kind of quickly go back to it about the sense of feeling. Sometimes feeling is pleasurable, or sometimes there is something that is a pleasurable experience. So how can you say that everything that's impermanent, is painful or unpleasant or suffering? And I think that absolutely it's true. And there's actually places in the teachings where it wasn't the Buddha in this particular discourse, but a nun, a well-accomplished nun, Sister Dhammadina, who was answering some questions and answers, and basically went into a description of feeling, and basically was saying, when there's a painful feeling and it changes or it subsides, then it becomes a pleasant feeling. When there is a pleasant feeling and it changes or subsides, then it turns into a painful feeling. So it's acknowledging that there is painful or pleasant feeling, even in the midst of change. But that, yes, so there is pleasurable experience that happens when painful experience changes. But overall, the global nature of experience is that it will constantly change, so that, your painful feeling may turn into a pleasant feeling. That's great, until it turns into a painful feeling again. So looking at it from the broad perspective, can you hold those levels of feeling as something that is inherently satisfactory or inherently something you want to trust in? Because even though painful feeling may turn into pleasant feeling, it's likely to turn into painful feeling again. So do you want to be constantly moving that level with that level of experience, and always hoping for the pleasant and hoping not to experience the unpleasant, because it's this constant flow. So that's when I think, he basically says, is it, unsatisfactory or satisfactory? And that the whole experience of that changing nature of experience is really, in the long run, globally unsatisfactory.
So then really, okay, and that's very helpful, thank you. Because if I look at the Pali, but is that which is impermanent, painful, or pleasurable, it's dukkha, or...
is it satisfying,
So-
satisfactory or
Yeah,
not satisfactory?
So if it's
Yeah.
really more translated as satisfactory, then it
Yeah.
makes more sense.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome. So let's take a break. Maybe just 5 or 10 minutes stretch, get up, move around, come back for part 2.